And we are live. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world. I'm really excited to see you and be in touch with you and have a guest. I'm so excited about this. I have my friend, one of my favorite astrologers, S.J. Anderson, who is going to be joining us today. I love having guests. And I wanted to just give you a couple of updates real quick. I know I've been getting a lot of, and I still continue to thank you for all your support and messages. A lot of people are asking about my health, and I am getting so much better. So again, thank you so much for your patience and your support. I'm sure you've noticed that I've had a little bit of like brain fog too, a little bit, but I'm coming out of it. Coming out of it. Ruby's sitting right next to me. She's getting a lot better. So thank you again for all your kind messages. The other thing is, one I wanted to say that like I a lot of y'all know I've been really excited about having guests come on board. I know that y'all attended a lot of the other guests that I've had on my channel, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to bring SJ on board, you know, my readings are sold out for the entire year, and so I get a lot of questions about birth charts, and y'all asking like, who else can I get personalized readings from? I'm going to give SJ the floor very soon, but he is absolutely amazing. And this is just, you know, I'm not even sure if I am going to do private readings starting 2025. I'm still sitting on the fence. It just really depends on a lot of factors for me. But I do get a lot of questions about rising signs, and I've made a couple short videos, rising sign, your ascendant, and I always get like further questions, and it gets so much deeper. So I'm like, why don't I just bring SJ on board to talk about your rising signs, why it's important, go over the birth chart, and we're gonna do this in a way where it's, you know, very comprehensive. SJ has this amazing setup and some slides for you, and then we will answer you know, a lot of your questions, because I know a lot of y'all have questions too. So SJ, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, tell everyone about your background, who you are. Again, thank you so much for coming on board. Really excited to have you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Very kind of you to invite me. Really happy to be with you and your audience. And it's always a good day when you get to talk about astrology with a bunch of people, and especially some of the, you know, they might seem like basics, and they are, but the basics are the most important ultimately for even advanced practitioners. I mean, that's why they're essential, you might say, essential basics. So we're all, you know, deep into the rising sign and the ascendant, and no matter where one is in their practice. So thank you for having me very much. A little bit about me. I'm a professional astrologer, working professional astrologer, have been so for several years now, from Austin, Texas. Shout out to I saw someone, DFW there, Dallas, Fort Worth, but grew up there, been there, lived there my whole life. And now I'm a professional astrologer. My style of astrology is something called Hellenistic inspired or infused. I mean, we're all contemporary astrologers, but as your audience may know, and as you know, Jimmy, there's a lot of different styles or ways that people practice astrology. So just a label that I kind of use, I trained in, was this school called Hellenistic, though I consider myself also maybe contemporary spiritualized forms of astrology or something like this. And I won't say much more other than, you know, I love centering practices of the spirit. And I mean, I think about that even in secular ways. I don't think we need to have a religiosity around that term, just the idea of self-development or self-reflection or trying to become better people, and, you know, the inner world, you might say, and how astrology can fit into that and to those processes. So anyhow, great to be here. Tarot's a bit, I was a student of tarot for a number of years before I even became an astrologer. So I really love your practice and what you do. And the tarot is so beautiful. The pure divination is such a beautiful thing. Astrology has some of that, but astrology is also more of a technical set of rules, and we're actually mapping the sky. So as we see these slides later, you're going to look at what's called a horoscope, which is a map of the sky, meaning that it's actually measurements that are operative at any moment of time. These measurements are true in that sense. I mean, this is the true measurement of a moment. And we then map that, and then we use that as a tool for divination. But so it is tethered somewhat to this map of reality in the present moment. I'm ready to dive into this presentation anytime you are, Jimmy, but that's a little bit about me. Thank you again for having me, and hello to your audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, SJ. And I love everything you said, because you know, I do tell my subscribers, like, you know, astrology, tarot, they're all tools of that I use, that I'm fascinated with, and I know they work for a bigger purpose, which is so I can inspire you, and I can empower you, and I can guide you into becoming, you know, the best version of yourself, and to empower you, and to really vibrate at this high frequency. So I really love, you know, the merging of the two. And with, you know, what you said earlier, absolutely, every astrologer has had different mentors, have, you know, learned in a different way, different training, different teachers. You know, I'm sure everyone knows who I, you know, worked with as well. So it is really great to have, you know, just at the core of it, someone who is so passionate about astrology like you. And really, I love spreading, you know, the fact that a lot of my subscribers are now asking so many questions. They're really into tarot, and they're really starting to learn more about astrology, and they're so fascinated with it. So I'm excited to have you on board. And again, the rising sign, I always talk about it. You know, and I'll say this just real quick. Like I always say, you won't get your full horoscope unless you read your rising or your ascendant. You got to kind of, you know, they tell the full story when you read your sun and your rising, and you will notice, you know, a lot of, and I get so many comments that are, you know, oh, I don't really feel anything, you know, happening with what you said. Or like, well, did you read your rising? And that's where it really resonates. Some people will really resonate with their sun, some will resonate with their ascendant or rising. So I'm glad you're here to demystify and to educate, and, you know, so we can learn more about the rising sign. And yeah, and then so should I pull up the slides for you?
Yeah, let's do that. And, you know, there's not too many. It won't take too long, but this will at least ground us into some visuals and some just kind of basics, that kind of laying some foundational ideas out. And then we can remove the slides, less kind of a lecture and more of just the free flow. But I think this way gives us that grounding, which I think is useful to teach as a, you know, teacher of this stuff. So yes, I'd love to see those slides at any moment.
Absolutely.
I'm ready to dive into them. So yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Shall I run with this, Jimmy? Is that okay?
Let's do it. I'm going to give you the floor.
Beautiful. So, you know, this is the first slide, and it's really the main point of this little slide grouping, is just that even more than your sun or moon. And so Jimmy was just speaking about this, the sign of your ascendant degree. And I'm going to show you what that is here in a second. So you hopefully have a much better sense of what that is. But the sign, the zodiac sign of your ascendant degree, we also call that the rising sign. That's the part of your birth chart, which is the map of you. I was referring to that earlier. It's that snapshot of these measurements of space and planetary space. That snapshot, that's the exact moment you were born. And when you look at that symbol map, the rising sign is maybe most representative of you. And you've seen how I've written this, maybe most, because in astrology, there's always different opinions. And sometimes there's other factors that maybe there's another point. But basically, you know, highly likely that the selfhood will express through the symbolism of the ascendant or rising sign. And that's a core part of our astrological system, somewhat uniform across styles. And so, okay, so what is the rising sign then? Let's just keep going here. It won't take too long, mind you, but it's the zodiac sign that was ascending on the eastern horizon at the exact time and location of an individual's birth. So all of you guys out there are somewhere in the world. In that city you're in, or in that locality, there is an eastern horizon, and that's where the sky comes out of the earth. It appears to come out of the earth. That's always east, wherever you are in the world, and it's because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. You may have heard this growing up. I learned this very young. So you always look to wherever the sun is rising, that's the east. And it's because the rotation of the Earth's axis, we're spinning every 24 hours, such that the sky appears to go from east to west. And the core of the rising sign is that the ecliptic, which we're going to look at some images right after this slide, but the ecliptic, which is simply the sun's path, it's a little band where you have the path of the sun, and then the planets and the moon are within, I think it's like a 9-degree band. And that's called the ecliptic. Okay. So the ecliptic is rising on the eastern horizon. And let me stop here. This is a kind of a complex, actually, set of questions. So we're not going to have time to cover all of the astronomy that's required to really master these concepts. But if you're like, this is Greek to me, oh, SJ, this is Greek, just I have to lay this out because it's for the clarity. But just know, yes, this would require astronomical studies. You know, people study this with whole courses to really master these concepts. So you're not alone if this isn't quite making sense. These graphics, I think, will help. So wherever you are, you can see that this is the sun rising. It will rise in the east, and then through the day where you are, as the earth is rotating, the sun will move to the highest point, usually around noon. Okay. And then it will fall, and then it will have sunset, around 6, roughly speaking. That's the ecliptic. That's that band where the planets and the sun are. Okay. This changes based on the season. Sometimes it's higher during the summer months and it's lower during the winter months, northern hemisphere. But that is really what we're describing here. Our horoscope maps the planets onto the ecliptic. And I think later you'll see slides of horoscopes that will make this even more clear. But just for now, no, you see sunrise, sunset. This is the ecliptic. This is the day that we experience each day on Earth. All right. Okay. I'm going to keep going. This is the ecliptic, and this is where we start understanding the signs of the zodiac. This is actually quite complex, and so I'm gonna again refer you to more research. But just know that here's that little Earth ball, and the Earth moves around the sun 365 days. It takes for the Earth to fully move around the sun, but the Earth is also spinning every 24 hours, and so. Just know that when you look at the ecliptic on the eastern horizon, what it is actually the grouping of stars on that eastern horizon are the zodiac signs, which are not the constellations, but that share names with the constellations. And this gets a little bit confusing, so I won't say much more about it, but that's what we're really looking at is the zodiac sign that's rising on the eastern horizon. And I'm going to skip ahead here to another slide quickly, and then I'll come back. But this is our horoscope, and you can see here today in New York City. This is right there in New York. You've got at sunrise. The sun is currently in Libra, so Libra was rising as the sun rose because the eastern horizon, of course, was where the sun is at sunrise, and that would have been a Libra rising moment. At noon in New York City, you'll have the sun, or this is actually 2:54. The sun will be in Libra, but look at the rising sign. It's now Capricorn rising at 2:54 p.m. in New York. You see it there. And then today in New York at 8:54 p.m., or sorry, 6:54 p.m., 18:54, the sun will still be in Libra. So the sun is in Libra all day, but the ascendant sign at 6:54 is Aries. And so that's just a little bit of another illustration, horoscopically, we might say. This is called a horoscope, and this is what astrologers use. I've only put the sun here, but we can put many, many planets or planetary points in this horoscope.
Yeah, and so I'm sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead, Jimmy, please.
Just so everybody knows, like, this is what your birth chart looks like. So everybody has a birth chart, and this is just kind of like, this is the standard model. And so the planets are in different houses. I'm going to let SJ talk about this, but I just want to let y'all know, because I know a lot of y'all may have not even seen a birth chart, but everybody has one. You have a unique chart from everyone else on this planet. All right. So, and it all begins with the rising. We read it from, well, I'm going to let SJ explain that. But anyway, yes, this is just an example of the birth chart. If you do get a personal reading. Yeah.
Yes, and really just to pay attention, what's quite important here is you see the ascendant sign changes throughout the day, even though the sun sign stays the same. And so another way to say is that everybody born today has the sun in Libra. So you're not that much. So everybody's a Libra. but not everybody has the same rising sign. And so this is, let me go back to the other slide, because this was the next slide, which is that this is why, as Jimmy was just saying, the rising sign is changing every 2 hours. And so you have 2 hours, 12 signs of the zodiac. That's 24 hours in a day. Every day, all 12 signs will be rising. And so it's the fastest moving of the major points in astrology. This is a sentence I like. It's so therefore in your birth chart, the ascendant is the most sensitive to time point of that unique moment of you, of that moment of your birth. And that's why we consider the ascendant to be more about who we are, more representative of the self, because it's the most sensitive point to time in your birth chart. And I want to just say here, twins can have different rising signs. So you can have two twins born 5 minutes apart, and that ascendant sign will have changed. And so, you know, even twins can be radically distinct based on this very sensitive and fast moving point in astrology called the ascendant, or then the sign of the ascendant, the rising sign. And so that's why some of the symbolism of why we think about the rising sign as being self. Okay, let me just keep going. Almost done. We're going to get through this. I have to put this slide here because to lay out just some of the other research for you, or other topics that you're going to have to understand to fully understand this. When I first wrote this, I had slides for this, and I'm like, no, this is too complex, but I have to mention it. And that's simply that the signs of the zodiac are not the zodiacal constellations. You often have an error here, and you'll see confusion. You may have seen some of these articles like there's a 13th sign. Your true sign is this other zodiac that has 13 signs. That's because people confuse the constellations and then the signs of the zodiac. They share names. And maybe there was original inspiration from those constellations, but the zodiac is actually an abstracted 30-degree segment of the ecliptic. And so you'll have to research this all later, but I lay it out here because I know some people out there are very curious and they're going to be wanting to know more. You could just type this in to whatever system and you'll start reading about those differences. Finally, I'll just say this is some really complex astronomy. And there's things like apparent or diurnal motion, secondary motion. I'm not even going to talk about what those are, but just know, like I said earlier, to really grasp this, you need to do like a course in astronomy for astrologers, or read more to go really deep. That's not this talk, but it has to be alluded to actually do this talk well. Okay, next slide. How to use the rising sign. So this is where we start getting into functional, how we can functionally adapt this into our world. And I wanted to talk, this is my key understanding of what the symbolism of the rising sign and why it's important. All right, I want to lay this out here because it drives everything else. Remember, this is the intersection of the heavens, the sky, and then the earth. And that's what that point on the eastern horizon is. And so think about the symbolism of that. It's where spirit incarnates into form, the heavens. And this is like more of a cosmology or maybe a spiritual philosophy or something. But there's this notion that the earth that we've here in, you know, we're kind of spirits that have maybe incarnated into these bodies. And I like this idea you see in certain spiritual schools, angels in earth suits. Maybe some of you have seen that before. But the idea is that the human self that we are, the selves that we are, is made up of both spirit and matter. I mean, you see this in a lot of religious histories across the world. You know, we're animals, but yet we're humans, and humans are distinct from animals because we have, like, we can write, Beethoven can write the Ninth Symphony, you know, Shakespeare can write the plays. We have this other quality. And I think that the ascendant point, because it's where the heavens meet the earth, and it's this fast moving, sensitive point of us, that's why, at least for me, it's so important. And the sign of the ascendant then speaks to the nature of our beingness, our human beingness in the horoscope. So just know that that's a big part of it. From the ether, from the heavens into material form, that's what human beings are. And that's what the ascendant point is, because it's right on that horizon where the heavens meet the earth. Okay, keep going. This is a slide we already looked at. Won't talk too much more about it. I guess I'll just say here, you have a birth chart, everybody out there. There are great calculators online. I wish I had a slide here to recommend my favorite calculators, but there's one site I really like. I know Peter, the coder, met him. He's in Prague. It's called astro-seek.com. Free website. You can just go there and just click calculate my birth chart, put in your birth data. What you'll need is the city you were born, the time you were born, and then so city and time and date. I mean, that's it. From that, you will then get a unique map of that moment in time, because all of this is contingent on the location. But once you get your birth chart, and this might come as a great revelation to a lot of you out there, because as Jimmy was saying earlier, you're listening to tarot readers or reading horoscopes for a certain sign because you've always said, hey, I'm a Libra in this case. But you might get your horoscope from astroseek.com and say, well, oh, wow, I'm a Capricorn rising. And then it may all click in why you are like you are, or why maybe Libra didn't quite fit for you. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm a Capricorn, actually. Now that explains. And here's the next slide. I'm going to go to this slide now here, and some quick delineations for Capricorn rising. This is how you can use it. Each sign of the zodiac has meaning. It's this whole deep symbolism of meaning. Okay. So whatever your rising sign, this is just one example. I've only done it for Capricorn rising in this talk, but the rising sign can speak to personality. That's you, right? The nature of how you function as a personality. It can speak, sometimes we think about it as descriptive of appearance, or maybe how you move in reality, kind of the nature of the body or the self or the appearance, or our roles in life. Sometimes it can be kind of a core role we play. And so, for example, I won't read all these, but like Capricorn rising, they might be more serious or reserved. That's part of the Capricorn symbolism. They might be ambitious, goal-oriented, etc. The appearance of a Capricorn rising, sometimes we might think about older than their actual age, or they appear to be like wise beyond their years. Or if like a teenager Capricorn rising, maybe they're like, wow, you have the air of an adult or something, or the appearance of a mature person. Projecting authority, gravitas, maybe stern or rigid, you can appear that way. Roles in life, duty, discipline, career focus. So you can see how the nature of the symbolism of the rising sign, this is the one way that we use that in our astrological system. And that's why, just to go back to the other slide, when you get your horoscope later today, if you've never seen it, your selfhood or your rising sign, that symbolism may express you, okay, more than anything else you've seen. Okay, next slide. We're almost done.
And I'm going to just add something real quick. And so I think that a lot I've probably mentioned, just like in the most basic form, and you may have heard this, from others, but your rising sign, I mean, you can consider that as, sometimes people will say like, that's how the world sees you. That's how you want the world to see you. Sometimes, you can consider it as like, that's the armor you put on for the world. And the sun is your personality. So it really is just kind of like merging the two. I know like SJ is breaking it down in the most amazing way right now, but just like in the most fundamental, for those who are still new to rising signs. And he's about to show you exactly why it matters. Why. Yeah. And I see all your questions too, and I'm writing them down, and we're gonna go through them when he's done with his presentation. Okay, y'all. Thanks.
Yes. And I just say, just to kind of follow up there, Jimmy, on that idea that, there's stand-ins for how we can think about points. And often sometimes people say the horizon is how people see the ascendant or the rising sun, how people see you. Sun is maybe, other parts of the self, like in the ancient astrological text, you'll see the sun often referred to as things like the consciousness, or it's like the awareness aspect of self, whereas the rising sign is other parts of self, maybe more appearance oriented, or how people see you. So that's one way people make that distinction. The moon there, of course, can come in. That's also a physical part of the self, the moon being the body. Those are called the big three, and we have a sun and a moon and a rising, and they all speak to aspects or natures of the self. The one thing I will just say is that if I had to pick one, and let me just go to the next slide, because this is actually in the next slide right here. The rising sign is key to determining the astrological houses, not the sun. So the sign of your sun has nothing to do with the houses in astrology in terms of how we calculate the astrological houses. I'm not going to even say much more about that in this talk, because that's a whole nother can of worms about layering the groundwork of what are houses, how do you calculate it. But just know that the houses are where the various topics of life are found. So once you have the rising, you calculate the houses, and I'll show you on the next slide what those topics are. But basically, it's the core to how we read in astrology is the houses tell us major topics of the life. Without a rising sign, we don't know where those topics should be assigned in the horoscope. The sun does not do that. And so it's another reason why the ascendant actually is even more core to yourself, because that gives you the topics of your life. Okay. And just to say, I'm going to go back to this. I'll do it on this slide, but I'm going to read this first. The sign of the ascendant comprises the first house. In this house system that I use, you would go to the sign of the ascendant. So in that chart, let's just say Capricorn rising, that is the first house. And then the next sign, which in zodiacal order is Aquarius, that would comprise the second house, and then on and on and on. And that's one house system called whole sign houses. That's the house system I use. Others use other house systems. I'm not even going to say their names because they're strange names and it's just going to confuse you. But just know you've got, that's why the ascendant is distinct from the sun and more core for the self, as it tells us where the houses are. Here's just a quick example of some of the topics of life in the astrological houses. Again, beyond the scope of this talk, but you know, to hammer the point home or to bring it home. First house is appearance, personality. Okay. Money is the second. The 10th house is career. The 7th house is partnerships. I won't read them all, but those are core topics of the self. The rising sign gets us into those, not the sun. All right. Here's the final slide, I think, or one of the finals. And I wanted just to put here first house topics. These are my keywords, my favorite: self, life's purpose, vitality, body, character, appearance. So that's how I think about the first house. And I kind of like that slide, remember earlier, where the heaven meets the earth, the nature of beingness. That's kind of what I bring it down to its essential form, the ascendant of the first house. It's the nature of our beingness, which includes all of those things. It includes how we appear to people. It includes actually our purpose for being here, core sense of who we are, why we're here. All of those big questions of identity and self come through the rising sign. I like to think about things in astrology as octaves. So sometimes we have more mundane octaves of meaning, like, you know, the 6th house is our pets. Maybe that's not as mundane, but, you know, that, or you might say the 4th house is our home or our neighborhood. But there also are these higher octaves, like spiritual, really heavy duty, you know, ways that those topics express. For example, the 6th house is not just a pet; it's a companion for daily life that infuses the soul with that daily interaction. You know, the 4th house is not just our physical home. It's actually the depth of everything that goes into the home, the lineage of our histories and families, and how we're supported and rooted into our world. So with the first house, I prefer, you know, when you do readings, you kind of like to go to these higher octave core aspects sometimes, because maybe it's more meaningful. But just know that it is things like, you know, the appearance, the clothes you might wear, but it's also this really deeper thing of the purpose and the nature of being. Okay.
And
so we've done this.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, it is very interesting. And if the deeper you get into your rising sign, there are some, like, I love that you talked about like physical appearance too. Like there's based on your rising. It's so funny because like, if you were Taurus rising, for instance, you're known to have like these thick necks, and even like Aquarius rising, like the eyes, it's all about the eyes. And it's just, you can go really, really, really deep with rising signs. They say so much about you. They say so much about you. And another thing, and I'm sure SJ is going to talk about this in a second, but another thing is like when you have your birth chart, all the planets are having conversations when you look at the aspects, right? And so it's so important because it's not, you know, it really is beyond, you know, your sun, your rising, your moon's involved. There's a lot other things that are happening. So it is really, really fascinating. But again, we're just focusing on the rising here.
Yes. And I will say, I didn't include any of that here because I didn't want to, I just, you know, if I was really going to like teach all this stuff, I would want like a multi-week course where we're breaking it all down. And just know, you know, I do have a page. I'm going to plug this here, not to plug it, but just to say I do this on my Patreon. We have once a month lives where there's actually modules where we can go in and just do deep breakdowns, covering all of the nooks and crannies that we need to actually fully grapple with this stuff, or try to fully grapple with it. So just know it's not even my Patreon. There's all kinds of resources out there where you can go deeper and learn in a more systematic way over time. But just to say, yes, Jimmy's right on that. Another component of this is every sign and this is getting into a core of astrology. We have that signs have what are called ruling planets.
Mm-hmm.
And so Capricorn has ruling planets, Saturn being one of the main ruling planets. And so then you look to where Saturn is, and that tells us a whole nother layer of how the self wants to express. I don't have it up here on this slide, but just imagine the sun is actually, this is Saturn in this case. And you would say, well, Saturn was in Libra in the 10th house of career. So you would say that the selfhood wants to express through the 10th house of career. And that would be a core way to understand maybe someone's purpose, is where the planet ruling the rising sign, where is that in the horoscope, and what are the symbols of that in a horoscope? And yes, and then there's all other interrelationships between planets, and they're all connected, and then you build chains of meaning. And yes, this is what we do, in an astrology reading. It's a beautiful thing. So I don't want to get too lost here, but it is very beautiful. It's the way that symbolism can often resonate so deeply and synchronistically with our life experience.
Yeah,
it's the mystery of life, but the astrological kind of way that those mysteries get expressed is such a beautiful thing.
And yeah, I think someone asked a question, and we're gonna get to all your questions really soon, but I just, one that's standing out is Matthew Ryan. So he was asking, should we be watching Jimmy's videos based on our writings? Rising signs. Jimmy does those great astrology sections. Well, thank you, at the beginning of each. So I'm just gonna really quickly answer that. Yes, you should be watching your rising, but it doesn't disclude your sun as well, okay? Because that still is a big part of it. Remember, it tells this bigger story, and you can go really, and again, a lot of it depends on your birth chart. Like, for instance, I think most people know I'm an Aquarius. I have Gemini rising, so Mercury is my chart ruler, but my sun is in my 9th house with my Venus, with conjuncting my midheaven. The sun is really important for me to read in any of any horoscope. And so it's really both. It's really both. And then when I do your tarot reading, that's basically like what's going on for the sign that I'm saying at that time, whether you are rising, whether you are moon, whether you are, it's your sun. So it really is just, it really is both, but it gets so much deeper. And the more that you learn your birth chart, it's just a lot more exciting, because then you get to see, because I think that's where it comes in, where people say, oh, I resonate more with my sun, or I resonate more with my rising. I've had people say they resonate more with their moon during certain moon cycles. So it really I recommend all three. I mean, the moon is really important too, but like sun and rising, definitely the two biggest there. And I think I did mention I think it was a few months ago in a monthly forecast, I think we are so conditioned to just read our sun, when horoscopes came out, in the early 1900s, like 1920s, in newspapers, it was just sun signs, right? It was just sun signs. So I think that when this was kind of being introduced, to the world, I think people just naturally assumed that's the most important thing because of our conditioning. But and wow, that was like 100 years ago. That was like 22, or yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about. But okay, giving you the floor.
Yes. No, it's good. No, and that's what I would say to folks. Like, all your birth chart is actually, all of it is you. This is another way to think about it, that the totality of it and its complexities, including the core of the 7 traditional planets, the contemporary, we might call them, or modern outer planets, which include dwarf planets and, what I call transpersonal planets. All of that actually is you in totality. And so just to say it a different way, there's many different points where parts of you are expressed in your natal chart. And often there's latency. Sometimes you might not be feeling as much into a part of the chart, but then life conditions or other people pull out parts of us, parts of our charts. Like, you might be around a certain friend and it's like, okay, there's the Aries coming out now because of what we call synastry, where you compare 2 people's birth charts. Every person you interface with has their chart and it's triggering your chart. And so, of course, some people you'll be more relaxed or more likely to express other parts of your chart because of those interactions. But just to say, yes, I would say, watch videos for your sun, read horoscopes for your sun, for your ascendant, for your moon. And, one recommendation I've heard that I really like is do that for 2 months, read all 3. Then you might be like, oh, actually, consistently, it's been that moon sign that's been speaking to you. And then that might be what you always do from there on out, or consistently it's the ascendant sign. And so I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself to decide before you actually experience what works for you. And that's a core part of astrology too. It's invitations into explorations. It's not any kind of edicts that are restrictive. Nothing in astrology should be restrictive. It should be open-ended explorations of resonance that inspire us. And so let me see if there's one more slide that I think speaks to that. And we've talked about this one. I won't go to that one anymore. It's the final slide, and I just said it there. These are living symbols. And so we work with these living symbols, meaning that they're alive, they change, they morph, they're not fixed. And we explore with these living symbols. Humanity changes, technology changes. We get new words in language every year, new languages, new words, new parts of reality. These living symbols meet that newness. That's the beauty of astrology. It meets us wherever we are. The sky is with us just like it was 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. Same sky, same planets. And, our task is to interface with these living symbols to create meaning in our contemporary lives. No permanent verdict on our lives or nature, and so I just want to, that's really important, because if we go back to this slide about Capricorn rising, you might not have really related to some of this stuff, and that's okay. This isn't an exhaustive list of what that could mean, and it's more important to kind of inspire yourself with this rather than to be like, oh, I'm hardworking, oh no, and, and get down about it. Because there's always ways to use it, to inspire, to add value. And that's what we try to do, at least my way I like to use this stuff. So, okay, that's it for this slide presentation. Again, it was very short, kind of short and compressed. There's so much more. And I'm, for what it was, I hope it gave you something or some kind of core ideas here that can be useful for you about the rising sign. So I'll end it there. I don't know if you want to keep it up or maybe we take it off or whatever.
Yeah, let's I can do that here. But thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. I hope that clarified a lot. I know that, some of y'all know a lot about your rising signs and your charts too. So I hope that offered a lot more depth as well. One thing that when I started, even when I first started, before I started studying astrology, I think I've told y'all this before. I would read my rising before I read my sun. Like, that's how important it is, right? For your horoscope. So, and I know a couple people have been asking about how do you find your rising sign, and I think that SJ did answer that. You need the time you're born, and of course your birth date, and then you plug it into, AstroSeek is amazing. So, but there's a dash between that. I left it in the comment box. So it's astro.seek. And there's several, websites and programs out there that you can use. AstroSeek is just a really great one. Even if you want to just do astro.com, but there's so many out there. There's some that I would, probably not recommend. So that's why these are 2 that are really, really great. So, yeah. So we're going to get into some questions. SJ, are you cool with that? Let's break it down. Let's do some Q&A. So I've been writing some of your questions down and just kind of starring some of them up here. So
I'm just going to say quickly, it's Astro dash, because you said dot there. You said dash and then dot, but just so everybody's out there, just the dash, the small dash on the keyboard that's common in website addresses, astro-seek.com. Astro.com is the other one I would give. Those 2 we can trust them because, we know the programmers, they're longstanding in the community, and calculators online can sometimes not have the back end that's accurate because it's just a coding skill. Sometimes people just don't value that in terms of their web creations, but those 2 are going to be quite trustworthy and somewhat accurate, very likely accurate when you plug your data in and know its location and then location, date, time of your birth. That location is quite important. Okay. So just go ahead, Jimmy. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that, but sorry, go
No,
ahead, please.
thank you so much for doing that. And I'm just actually very excited for people to actually see their birth charts and see where all the planets are and that, you know, where they were in the sky when they were born. You know, there was a couple of people that were asking if you have the sun and rising in the same, first house, does that make it more intense, or is there anything that you can speak of that when they have their sun and rising in the same house? Yeah.
100%. And I would even expand the question here a little bit. Any planet in the first house, the nature of self, that is the first house, will then also incorporate and include the nature of that planet that is in the first house. And so because the sun is a planet of selfhood, it's the consciousness. The sun is also other things. And I wanted to say this earlier, but let me say it here. The sun can be leaders. It can be our role as leading other people. It can be father. It can be, just other things that aren't us. It can represent things outside of us. Whereas the ascendant is always going to be us. And that's another reason why the ascendant might be more the self than the sun. But just, some delineations that I would go to immediately with the sun in the first house or the sun near the ascendant, that person might have an inner light that they're able to radiate. The sun can be the warmth of consciousness. I would say with a person that has the sun in the first, a full invitation to do inner work or to bring their consciousness to the nature of being. So these could be things like, therapy, or things like even spiritual journeys, or things like self-development, which is a word you hear a lot these days. That person might want to focus their consciousness on the developing the self, where the self becomes a primary theme of their self, you might say. So it's like self times two. Sun is self, and then the first house being self. So you have a doubling up of that theme. I would say, that would be my short answer here. Father could be important to the nature of the unfoldment of the self. So that person might have had a special relationship with the father that really informs who they are and how they are in adulthood. That would be something I would want to explore pretty quickly with them. But then a lot would also depend on the nature of the rising sign. And then, for example, where is Leo in the birth chart? Because that's the sun, the sign that the sun rules. And that area where Leo is, those house topics may also be very important to the person's identity or self. So just a few ideas there. But real quick, the last thing I'll say is you might want to read your horoscope for that sign. That would be another reason to read that sign rather than the moon sign, because you would have 2 points of that sign rather than 1 point for the moon. But
it really does amplify that energy, like you said. And it also, I think you mentioned it, but and this is moving like a segue into the next question. Any planet that's in the first house, like, they're so different. So it really is just like breaking it down. And if you're new to this, like, getting a birth chart reading would bring you a lot of insight. A lot of people are asking how common is it? Well, let me rephrase this question. And this is kind of like going with what I just said, but a lot of people have a lot of planets in the same sign. I'm noticing that Carmen has 7 planets in Aquarius, and so many people have a lot of planets in the same sign. Their sun making up most of, or when they're all in the same sign, all in the same house. What can you talk about that? Someone has 7 Sagittarius placements that mentioning. You would shed light on that.
Carmen, 1962 February, maybe. That'd be my guess. That was an epic time in our recent reality when we had all of the traditional planets there in Aquarius. Wonderful, strange moment. And you can see those 60s kicked off the technological age that was. I know this isn't about the astrology of the world, but just as an example, when you have an overweight in a chart or in a moment of time, one sign, the reality can take on the nature of that sign. And if in 62 TV and the space race, and quite an Aquarian moment there in the early 1960s. But so I would just say this. I mean, we've been looking at the chart, and the point of the ascendant, that degree, the sign that it's in is the self. The sun is a form of the self. But it goes back to what I said earlier, that the totality of the chart is actually the self too. And everything that the chart is and represents, and how the specifics in the chart interact with each other. You might think about it as like a band or a symphony. Your chart is a musical symphony. All of the points are playing an instrument. And when you combine that, then that becomes the music of you. The horoscope is kind of your song, you might say. And so when you have more planets playing a similar note, it may be that your song or your chart, it sounds more Aquarian or is more Aquarian because you have 3 planets there, for example. And so one initial layer would be to say, well, what's the symbolism of Aquarius? That's probably more important for you, figuring out how that relates to more parts of your life, for example. Now, the specifics of your natal chart will tell us, okay, it's this topic and this topic and this topic are all connected directly to Aquarius because those 3 planets in Aquarius rule these topics. But in a general sense, without having a chart with me, you just would, you talked about doubling up or amplification earlier. This is just more amplification with that energy. And yeah, you could consider reading your horoscope for that sign, or listening to your tarot reading for that sign as well, if you have three or more planets. We actually have a name for it called a stellium. It's called a stellium. And that just means you have 3 or more planets in a sign. And so, yeah, try out reading for that too. It may be that you just relate to that even more. But a lot of this is custom analysis, because there's, what are those planets? How strong are they in Aquarius? Do those planets like Aquarius? Is one of them Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, or Mercury, which can rule Aquarius? And so that might amplify even more or less depending on those custom factors. But short answer, it amplifies the symbolism of that sign in your life experience.
Absolutely. A really great question. And I feel like I've answered this a couple times in other live streams, but what if someone doesn't know their time of birth? What if it's not on the birth certificate?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So in astrology, we have this process called rectification.
Mm-hmm.
And it just is a practice that astrologers do to try to basically reconstruct your birth time. And they'll they'll meet with you, they'll go through long interviews about your life events. They'll try to then look at different possible rising signs, and then try to pick the best one that they think is you, using their astrological techniques. That often works best if you have a range. So a lot of times people will be like, mom and aunt told me it was the morning. I know it was before noon, but after 6. And then you actually would only have like 2 options for rising signs. In that world, it's quite easy to rectify, because sometimes there can be stark differences, and one rising sign is clearly more accurate based on your life biography, your history. So throw out rectification. That would be the first strategy. And this goes back to the sun now, and the importance of the sun. Ancient astrological texts, the most oldest we have, talk about an alternative ascendant if you can't find the ascendant. And that would be to use the new moon or full moon that happened before you were born. And you have a degree of that new moon or full moon. And that could be then an alternative ascendant for you. And so you would use, so for example, we just had a Pisces full moon, which was that lunar eclipse back on the 17th or 18th of September. Anybody born today that doesn't know what time they were born, we know they're a Libra sun, but you would just then, you would just say, well, let's try Pisces rising for them, because the new moon or full moon before they were born was in Pisces. So that's a strategy. The other one that a lot of people like, and this is actually in the Vedic schools, they have something called the Surya chart, and that is Sanskrit for sun. And you would just put the sunrise chart is what it is. So that slide we looked at earlier, sunrise in New York City today is Libra, because the sun's in Libra. So you would just read your chart with the sun in the first house. And that you would basically read your sun sign. That would be to put it very simply, read your sun sign and calculate the astrological houses from your sun sign. And that will give you a proxy or stand-in that can be accurate. Yeah. But it's the new moon or full moon, the sign of that, use that as the rising, or the sun on the ascendant, the sunrise chart. Those are the two that I would recommend. And lastly, some people say read the noon chart. I don't really do that. There's other forms of doing it, but those are the ones I would recommend for you. Well, actually, let me just say this other thing here quickly. Finding your birth time. Try to find it. Go to family members, anybody who was around when you were born. They might have a memory. Interview as many as you can and see if you can get that range of time. Figure out how to get birth certificates in your state. So for example, in Texas, where I'm from, there's different types of birth certificates. I had one for a long time that didn't have a birth time. I went to the state of Texas Health Department, ordered one from them. They actually kept it on record, a longer one that had my birth time. And so sometimes the states don't offer that. The hospital records are another thing you can go to. Sometimes hospitals keep records. So there's a journey to discover that birth time that I would encourage you, especially if you're really passionate about astrology. Try to do everything you can to then give up on it before you give up on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then rectification would be the, last resort. But yes, it's, I think I mentioned in all my Canadian friends, I lived in Toronto for a little bit and I couldn't get out and I had to order a birth certificate. And there was a long time ago. It was like after college and I had to leave the country. I had to like get my birth certificate. So I got in touch with the hospital. And nowadays you can just go to the hospital that you're born at. Like they should have like a link or something to order like birth certificate. So I would start there. That's the very first thing. But then yes, everything else, as Jay said. I have a very interesting question that I want to answer, but I'm going to let you answer this. Louise asked, and I'm sure a lot of people are thinking this too. If something is fated in your chart, will it definitely come to fruition?
Interesting question. Yeah, I would just say that the something, that's really where the rub is in that question, right? What is the something? And that's not always clear. I mean, every astrologer, you go to 5 and they're going to have 5 different opinions about what the something that's fated based on your birth chart is. This is how let me just say, let me answer this way, Louise. How do we use astrology? How is it useful? How can it predict our future? How can we, interface with our future reality using astrology? And I like to think about it as a processing tool. That's its number one best use, in my opinion, is that the symbol map is best utilized as an interactive dialogue with the life events that are unfolding. So I prefer to use it as in that sense. So for example, let me say it this way. Let's go back to the chart we were looking at earlier. And let's say you had Sun in the 10th house. We know that person, Capricorn rising with the Libra Sun in the 10th house, there's this symbol meaning of that. And, the textbook 101 would say, all right, that person's hardworking with a Sun in the 10th, career focus. And that might be the something in this case that the symbolism tells us. But let's say there's a season of life in that with that person where they're actually needing a sabbatical, like too much of hard work. And they actually, for health purposes or for spiritual purposes, need to get away from their job and their career. And in that situation, you would want to use the birth chart to interface with and process that emergent reality in their world. And so in that case, you could read the Sun differently. So, maybe you're going to rely on another person to take over. That could be the Sun representing someone else. And that Capricorn rising, instead of the hard work side of it, you can go to the creative side of Capricorn, which is another side of its symbolism. Venus and Mars are big in Capricorn, and maybe they're just going to get into like a season of a little bit more stepping back and getting into some of the creativity that can be implied with Capricorn, or the home, like in a garden for 2 months, resting. That would be Capricornian. So my answer to you would simply be that you would want to not restrict life. You would want to use astrology to interface with life. And, that said, look, we don't know the future. I'm someone who's not, there's schools and different astrologers, and they debate this all the time. I remember I was at one of the big astrological conferences in 2018, the United Astrology Conference, the biggest in the world. And they actually had a panel. They kicked off the conference with a panel debating, is prediction killing astrology? Because astrologers had just gotten the election wrong in 2016, and a classic egg on the face. A lot of big magazines and publications went to another conference and they interviewed the astrologers, who's going to win. Everybody picked Hillary Clinton. Like other commentators picked Hillary Clinton. And so astrology was in this kind of a place of like, they got this big thing wrong and kind of looked bad in the public eye. So anyhow, the point is, a lot of astrologers are like, yes, it's not about prediction. Astrology is about processing, finding meaning, exploring our past with astrology, confirming events that have already happened. And I think it's more powerful that way. As a pure future technology, it's not always the best for that, Louise, is what I would say. And so that's why it's important to kind of hold different scenarios, work with the symbolism. Like we know, for example, just another example, I'll stop here in a second, but we have a new eclipse cycle that just started in Pisces, the tropical sign of Pisces. There's going to be 3 eclipses in Pisces. We just had one, we have 2 more. And that's a whole area of all of our charts that is going to be changed by this eclipse cycle. And so, yeah, we can sit and use your chart and say, well, here's 5 things I would be interested in that these symbols evoke that are in line for potential change for you, Louise. But if I list 5, and then you might already say, well, that's the one that's already emerging, right? So now maybe there's one we would want to focus on a little bit more because of what you've shared about what's happening in your life. And so that's a way that, as a processing tool, it actually helps refine the narratives we're going to tell about the future, but we've used it to interface with the present in order to do that. If that makes sense. I know there was a lot in what I just said there, but that would be some kind of answer to that question.
Yeah. And I always say this, and I'll never change this, but it's you have to take that action, and you have to make, your life meaningful. Astrology is a guide. Your birth chart is a guide. And yes, there's things that are in it that make you so unique, and your life is going to be very unique from other people. But I'm actually going to leave. I think I did this earlier. So because I am booked up for readings, and SJ is so great with, doing birth chart readings, if anybody wants a reading, and I think I mentioned this in the last community post I did, but I just left SJ's link to book a reading with him. He's booked up until January. And I've said that January is going to be a pivotal year, one of the most pivotal, if not the most pivotal year of the 2020s. And so you want to know right from the beginning, like what's going on, like with you and your life, because everyone on this planet is going to be having these changes in their life, and you constantly go through changes, but we are going to have some, transits that are just so compressed, and I'm not going to get into it now, but it's a big year. It's a big year. And, anyone, just the fact that I was sold out for the entire year, like back in April, you want to just hop on these, and SJ's amazing. He's affordable. He's, I would just slot it in. I would slot it in because you're not going to be, if you want a reading, you're going to want to get one. You want to book it now. But yeah, there's so much to talk about birth charts and rising signs, but I hope that brought a lot of clarity. I know that a lot of people have had other questions. I know there's so many here. I think, why don't we look at another one here? This is a good one because this question, and I'll just preface it by saying, well, so Kelly Green, she asked, my sun and my rising is Capricorn, but I'm on the cusp. At what time does it change into Aquarius? So of course, like I'm gonna leave that to you, SJ. I'm gonna leave that to you. Yeah.
Yes. So I will say this about the concept of cusps. You tell that to a lot of astrologers in this moment of astrology we're in, and they don't like to hear that. Okay, they're going to be like, cusps aren't real, and they have they're kind of aggressively dismissive of the idea of cusps. I kind of go a little bit different with that, and I acknowledge that this is actually a technique of the 20th century. There's big astrologers like the only astrology book you'll ever need. There's some really big books that were written in the last century that propagated this idea of the cusp and how you can be kind of, as you get to the end of one sign, you may take on some of the qualities of the sign that follows. So I'm not as dismissive of it. For my practice personally, I do not use it as a concept because that's what the birth chart is good for. It's the precision technology where it defines very clearly the borders between sign energies. So there's no question when you use the tropical zodiac with the whole sign house system, it's actually very precise. And so we know that if your ascendant is in late Capricorn and your sun is in late Capricorn, remember, this is a mathematical calculation. It's not like feeling into, oh, you might be this or that. I mean, if your birth time is correct, it's mathematics, precision mathematics. So you're a Capricorn, and I would just go with that personally.
Yeah.
Now, there's something about Capricorn and Aquarius as a pair, because Saturn is the ruling planet for both of those signs. And so in that chart, all Capricorn risings are connected to their second house. And this goes into why Capricorn is like this hardworking, maybe industrious or work focused. Some of that is that Saturn is going to rule both the first and second house. So there's other unique custom reasons why certain signs may be connected to other signs. I would say maybe as your Saturn is in Aquarius, then your Capricorn energy wants to express through the Aquarian. Or maybe, like someone asked earlier, you have 3 planets in Aquarius, even though you're a sun Capricorn and a rising Capricorn. Well, you have important planets in Aquarius, or many planets in Aquarius. So that would explain why you maybe want to feel I'm more Aquarian. But the idea that it's because of the cusp, I personally don't practice that way, but I'm not as dismissive as other astrologers. And I don't like my personal, this is an aside, but astrology is a big tent, and there's a lot of practices under that large tent. And I think congeniality and kind of just making sure we're supportive of different ideas, that's a really core part of I think the astrological scene and community to make it thrive. And we don't have to agree, we can practice differently, but
yeah. And just to add to that, like I said, every astrologer has different backgrounds, different teachings and whatnot. And and this is for anybody that's a cuspian. I get so many people who are, always saying like, oh, I'm on the cusp of this. And, you can even think of it, if you look at your birth chart, is the same thing with, like just if you're going a little bit deeper, like degrees, like I'm Gemini rising, right? But I'm like right at 0 degrees. So it affects me. So I've had to be very open-minded about how I read that for myself too. So it really is, the astrologer you work with, if you are getting a birth chart reading, but it also is like it's more one-on-one. I don't think that you can just say like, oh yeah, you're this or that. I mean, it really is more of like having that one-on-one understanding with someone who is open-minded about listening to what you're going through, what your life path is, just looking at your chart. Okay. So that's a great question there. And I think that there was another question that was just, as we wrap this up, someone did ask, what if rising and moon are the same? I think we answered that, but I don't know if you wanted to talk about that specifically, the rising and moon, if that was the same sign. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would come back to what's the nature of the moon, and then that will be brought in or incorporated into the nature of self. And the moon is one of our core planets. I mean, it's so essential. Moon can be physical, body. The 3 quick keywords that I always go to with the moon, it's body, home, and then mother. Those are the 3: body, home, mother. Now, what does the home give us? What does the mom give us, ideally? And what is the body? Well, those are all about the kind of nurturance. With all of those things, we have to kind of nurture it and treat it well. So sometimes people would say moon would be like our nurturing facility. The other real common thing you hear with moon is just emotion, that moon is our emotions. I think that has to do with the fact that the moon, other than the ascendant or the angles, there's midheaven, there's some other angles that move as fast as the ascendant, but the moon is the second fastest moving body. Then it moves every 28 days through the zodiac. And so when we looked at the examples earlier, I was like, well, the ascendant's changing in New York. There's all of the signs of the zodiac will be on the ascendant, but the sun is in Libra. You could do the same analysis and say, well, the sun is in Libra for 28 or 30 days, but the moon will be in every sign during that 30-day period. And so the moon fluctuates quite fast, just like emotions do. I mean, in the course of a day, we have our hormones. We wake up. Some people have different circadian cycles. So again, body and emotion are connected. We feel emotions in the body. Oftentimes our emotions are contingent on if we've eaten, so you can see how the emotion and the body become joined. And that's all the lunar, signification. So if you have the moon in the first, I mean, right, I would go back to how important is your body to your life? How do you, tend to the body as a kind of personal philosophy? Mom, I mean, right away, it's like, what was mom like? How impactful was relationship to mom in early life? You know, you would go with that inquiry. How maternal is one in terms of their attitude or how they're perceived? You know, maybe people see you as a mothering energy. And, you know, again, and this isn't gendered at all. I mean, you know, the biggest, you know, pro football athlete with like the deepest voice and the most kind of masculine, like, you know, cis het person, they could just be nurturing, you know. And so these are things that apply to any type of other, you know, other ways we perceive the idea of mothering. But we nurture ourselves. I mean, think about what you've done today: brushing your teeth, taking a shower, washing your clothes. So this kind of body and material nurturance might become more important in a case where you have that moon in the first house.
And I do want to remind everybody, the moon is a rock. It's reflecting the sun, right? So I'm not going to go too much into it, but like, remember, this is like, go with it. Like, use that moon to be in touch with your emotional side, your intuition, all of that. All right. So I had Danielle, you asked a really great question that I think that a lot of people wonder about as well. So Danielle asked, so we just came out of that Pisces eclipse, right? She just asked, if you don't have Pisces in your chart, will you still feel the effect of the eclipse? So I think that brings up this bigger question. Like, if you don't have planets in a, you know, a certain sign in your chart, what does that mean, right? If you want to answer that.
You got it. And I would just say, everybody has every sign. So that would be my first. I would suggest getting your thinking around that. You know, Pisces is in every chart, and Pisces comprises a house in every chart. So for every chart, completely independent of the planetary placements, you have Pisces assigned a set of house topics. And so you can always explore the symbolism of Pisces, which would be the dreamy interstate realms of creativity and more collective oneness and even spiritual. So there's some quick ideas about the Pisces symbolism. It's a water sign, so it's more inner worlds of creativity. That would be then combined with the house that Pisces comprises. So let's say Pisces is your seventh house of your primary partner. Maybe that you have a partner that's Piscean, and that is, there you go. So you can always do work with the sign because the sign is always in a house. The case where there's no planets found in Pisces, you then refer, and it goes back to what we've talked about earlier, the ruling planets of Pisces. So every sign has primary ruling planets, and over Pisces, there's two primary. Jupiter might be the first one you would go to, and I'll add a third here, and then Venus. And that's because Jupiter is the ruler by what we call domicile. Venus is the ruler by what we call exaltation. And then for more contemporary or so-called modern astrologies, Neptune is a ruler. Sometimes you'll hear people say Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. And so what you can do if you have nothing in Pisces is just go to look where those planets are in the chart. Where is Jupiter? Where is Venus? Where is Neptune? Let's say they're all in the same house. Then it's really easy. You would say, well, your seventh house would be, let's say they're in like your 12th house. The nature of relationship actually there's something about all of that 12th house energy. What can the 12th house be? Retreating from the world, maybe more spiritual practices, people that want to maybe get involved in service. And so that would be how the Piscean and the partnership themes expressed through those stories of the other planets, the house, and particularly those ruling planets. And so that's what we all have those planets in our chart. Everybody has those planets. So, you know, it's just that you get connected to other parts of the chart when you look at the Pisces sector.
Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Danielle. And I know that I've gotten that question so many times through comments, but every sign in your chart, they all matter. Even if you don't have planets there, you know, like as Jay said, there's just going to be more emphasis where like you want to see where the planets are first, like in what houses, but all of them matter. Let's take just a couple last questions. This was a great one because I talk about degrees a lot, and I try not to because I know that a lot that goes a little deeper, and then your videos get longer, and then so you know, clearly we have this eclipse at a certain degree. Like every aspect is at a certain degree, and we can talk about degree theory for hours and hours. But SJ, if you want to sum that up in like the most easiest. I'll let you take that.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked, because I almost put this in the slides. I wanted to, and it didn't happen. But remember the ascendant, the point on the eastern horizon in any moment of time, that's actually one single point. It's a degree minute, and a degree second. It's actually a precise exact point that is rising on the horizon at each moment. Of course, that point is in a zodiac sign. And so you have not only the rising degree, which is the exact point, but then you have the rising sign. And we've been talking about them interchangeably here. But you're right to ask about it or to contemplate it, because 30 degrees in every sign. Well, one of those degrees is, I would say it this way, maybe the most sensitive degree. That is the degree that's maybe most you, such that when planets are transiting through a sign, like right now, the sun is in early Libra. What if your rising degree is in the last 10 degrees of Libra? Well, we might think that the middle part of October, when the sun is near your exact degree, that might be the time when you're more activated in terms of feeling lit up by the transiting sun on that exact degree. So a long way of saying, the degrees can be more specific points of sensitivity for then the larger stories that they're contained in, which would be the signs or the houses, or both in the case of the whole sign house system.
Absolutely.
And so I hope that is some kind of answer. I mean, it can be important. Yeah. I'll just say this: a lot of techniques are about exact degrees. So we have things like progressions or secondary or primary directions. So many astrological techniques are built around the degrees, and that's all they care about. I have some colleagues, they're just like, okay, it's the exact degree today. And or even some astrologers tend to want to talk about the day that an aspect is exact. So the conjunction, the sun meets Mars, that exact moment. And that's when they're concerned about talking about it. Whereas people like me are more sign-based. So when the sun and Mars are together in a sign, it's all relevant already. It's just there may be a peak of the event on that exact day or closer to that exact degree-based unfoldment. But I prefer sign-based because it's, I won't get into all that here, but when you have the signs accentuated, you're really brought into those stories and the blending when it's not so precise with the degree. But
yeah. And, there's, I think that I meant, and again, I think that I talked about, I don't actually maybe did not talk about this, but this is why just knowing your birth chart is really valuable and can offer a lot of guidance and insight, even just, reading your horoscope for the month. And when I do talk about degree, because you can look at your chart. And one thing that's happening, as we all know, if you're watching my videos, Mars is in Cancer, and Mars will retrograde. And I really I've been trying to make this, I've expressed this, really pay attention to this because Mars will retrograde next year. And for me, because I have Mars retrograde in my chart, it's going to hit the same degree that it's at in my chart. Okay. So it's going to have a really big impact on me around my birthday when that happens in January. So I can keep an eye on what's going on there. I can plan because I know that there's just going to be possibly a sensitive area for me. All right. So I hopefully that we clarified a little bit there, and I know SJ did, but if anybody has any questions about that would just let me know. I think one question that I should have started off with this. I don't know if you're comfortable with this, SJ, but people want to know what your sun and rising is.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm an Aries sun, Mars ruled fire Mars, right? I'm a rising in Libra, so that is, you can see I'm kind of, logical, structured. Jimmy was like, "Come on and talk," and I'm like, "Let me build this kind of prepare." Saturn rules Libra. I want to lay it out, try to make it a little bit beautiful, a little bit of a visual side, so we can get some of that refined container to carry things. And then I have Moon in Scorpio. So those are my big three. Thanks for asking. Yeah, appreciate the curiosity around that. So.
Yeah, of course. And I think that, is there anything that, I mean, if you were to break it down, because you're a Libra rising, we know that the eclipse that's happening soon will have, a impact on you. As a Libra rising, we have the sun. We talked. It's so funny. We were just talking about this yesterday. We have the Mercury Kazemi. I think that's what is it tomorrow? That's tomorrow.
2 days, yeah.
2 days. It's leading up to the eclipse. We also have the, remember the Libra's on the south, like the sun's conjuncting the south node. So there's a lot happening for Libra risings, and so for every other sign that it's a different house, everyone's going to be affected differently, and I try to express that for every sign goes through a different evolution, let's say that, okay, or something new. But I didn't know if you wanted to just end this with something about what people can expect with the eclipse that is happening in just like it's just a few days from now.
Absolutely. And I go back to the astrological houses, and now we're back to the importance of knowing your rising sign, because when you find your rising sign, you immediately find the house splay of the topics. And once you know what house Libra is assigned, then you have a list of topics that may be accurate for what you're grappling with as we get into next week and we have that Libra eclipse there in that house for you. So house topics, the short answer is to say, go to house topics, and it will give you the areas or life areas to begin your exploration around. The other thing I'll just say about this is we can track eclipse cycles, and they are about a 2-year cycle of eclipses through the same sign. Sometimes it's closer to a year, or sometimes closer to 2 years. The lunar nodes, this is a point people can research, but those are called eclipse points. They move through the zodiac every 18.6 years, and they stay in a sign about 18 months. But this Libra eclipse cycle will be completing in terms of this being the last eclipse in Libra. The first eclipse in Libra was last October. And so that would be relevant with this exploration. One, find the house and those topics. And then two, realize that there is a period that started either in July last year when the South Lunar Node entered Libra, the true South Lunar Node, or when the first eclipse happened in October last year. That may have kicked off events that you're in the middle of, and the changes, the fated changes that eclipses bring. So it's a longer cycle that may inform this moment this week. The things that you've been dealing with since October are going to likely be a part of that, or could be a part of that for you. So those are the two ways I would approach it. Now, did this question have a specific rising sign? Did they ask about their specific rising sign? Sorry, I don't want to. I can speak to that if you want. I mean, I can get some ideas. And to lay it all out, it would be a long. We would have to do a video. You've seen these like solar eclipse in Libra, all signs, and those videos are often long with that people do, and we would have sections for every sign, and
absolutely.
We would talk about for Capricorn rising, it back to your 10th house, career change next week. Maybe you're starting a job, ending a job. Maybe the promotion you got last October, there's now your first big project is due, and you're stepping into that power. For Capricorn risings with Libra in the 10th. So, that's just an example.
Yeah. No, that's no, thank you for that. One last thing, because I think this is really relevant to DJBTV. Great to see you too. So two-part question here. Well, the first question, how do you know if a planet is retrograde in your chart? Well, that is when you see your chart, I'm going to let SJ answer that, but I think that brings up a bigger question that a lot of people ask me through comments. What does it mean when you have your chart and a planet is retrograde in your birth chart? I think that we can end with that, because there's a lot of retrogrades happening. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So remember, it's just data. It's measurement. There's the part of astrology that's simply the measurement. And once you have your birth time and your birth location, time including date, then you enter it in. Just think about it like a computer. You enter it into the algorithm. The algorithm will then spit out what are called the planetary data. Up until this time, before we've had computers so widespread, books called ephemerides or an ephemeris were highly popular. So like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, I would have an ephemeris with me at all times. I would look up, and it would just be tables of data. And that's how I would get the information about where the planets were at a moment in time. That's kind of antiquated now. Some astrologers are like, I always have my ephemeris with me. And I'm like, why? I always have my app with me, and I can, it's the digital ephemerides, and it's way better and faster. But so my answer about how to find if something's retrograde, just go to these systems, plug your information in, and then the data that is put out by those websites, that's going to tell you. So on the second part of the question, I would say, what can it mean? It can mean, so first I'll say some schools like Vedic, they're not as interested in the retrogradation of planets. So they don't even consider it as much. When I have clients with retrograde placements, I sometimes like to explore what that planet means in the chart. It can maybe take a longer time for someone to come into those powers. Sometimes with a retrograde planet, we think about kind of delays or going back over, or just more of a need to go deeper in an area before things sort of move forward into their natural flow. So you'll see it in a life, like let's say someone has Mercury retrograde in the first, maybe early in life, they just, like, you'll hear these stories, Timmy didn't speak until he was 7, but then the first word he spoke was like beautiful poetry. And by the time he's 14, he's a genius. There's stories like this, like just a quiet kid. But it's not that they're developmentally, it's not like it's something that later is important. It's just, they were maybe just taking in the world. I forgot there's a real famous case of this. Like I think it might be Tolkien or something, these geniuses that just were quiet for a long time. And that would be the idea of kind of the speech, which is Mercury, maybe taking more time for someone to come into those powers. Or there might be seasons in life where that person may want to be more restrained with speech, or, embracing quietude or something like this. The idea of the retrogradation itself would just simply be that the planet is having to rest or pause. You might think about it that way. And so you just apply that to the planetary story. The other thing is with timing. So Jimmy mentioned earlier, if you have a retrograde planet and then that planet goes retrograde in the transiting sky, that could time seasons of life where you're more aligned with those moments. And so, that could be another way to look at it. But that would be my short answer on that. Thinking about how it takes a little bit more time or a little bit more thoroughness required to unleash that planetary power in the natal chart.
Great.
That could be a feature, not a bug. That could be a feature, not a bug. I mean, thoroughness and waiting is a great thing for a lot of parts of our lives. So.
Absolutely. SJ, I think, there's so many other questions. I'm noticing a lot of people coming in late too, because they're asking questions that we went over. So I think that we're going to wrap this up. I hope we answered everybody's questions, but again, I see some that we discussed. And I mean, I hope everyone got, I feel like we talked, that was great. I think that we gave a lot of valuable information. I hope that you were able to take away from this. A lot of it is actually getting your birth chart read, because even that first time that you get someone, you work with an astrologer to actually just gloss over your birth chart, it reveals so much. It reveals so much that some of y'all, it'll blow your mind. And it's so many other things happening in a chart all the time. I mean, there's all the planets we have. I mean, there's a lot. And so it's really great to have an astrologer just kind of break that down for you, so you can actually see, again, I just feel like it's nicer to know for you that you're going to have all these really fun surprises the first time you get your birth chart read with an astrologer, knowing, how everything is, kicked off by the rising sign, and how the rising sign is very important. So thank you so much, SJ. Thank you so much for joining our channel and enlightening everybody on rising signs and birth charts. And you went so deep. I love that. And I think that there's so much here that everyone's so grateful for, things that you went over. I don't know if there was any last things that you wanted to say. I know that we gave, and so, a lot of other questions that continually come through. I will post this, and then in the description box, I will leave link to SJ's website if you want to book a reading with him. I will leave the websites for AstroSeek, Astro.com, if you know, for you to find your birth chart. And I think I tagged SJ. He is on YouTube. You can follow SJ on YouTube as well. SJ Anderson 144. I'll leave that in the description box as well. And yep, your readings are out for October. It's a big month. We got that eclipse kicking off October. There's a lot happening in October, and I'm sure a lot of y'all seen it, and we've got a lot happening. But SJ, I want to just thank you and see if there's anything that you wanted to, you know, tell anybody, or anybody, everyone here. I mean, everyone's loving you. Everyone's loving you.
Well, I just want to thank you. Really privileged to be with you, and just honored to be with you, Jimmy. Very kind of you to invite me here. And so thank you very much for having me. Thanks for the conversation today, everyone. I mean, you can see why us astrologers, we love this stuff. That's how we become astrologers. So, you know, anytime to get to talk about it, it's a great part of, it's a great day when you get to explore astrology. So thank you for that. Find me on YouTube. I do on my channel monthly breakdowns of the transiting astrology in a more of a general forecast way. It's kind of one style that astrologers talk about the month ahead. So I haven't released my October forecast yet, still putting the touches on that, but it'll be out here before the 1st. So follow me there if you'd like to hear more of me, you know, talking about astrology and the videos I make about astrology. I've got a Patreon where I do a monthly live stream there. That also has a tier where I do a newsletter every month where we look at the week ahead, just some of the best charts using the traditional astrology. It's called Lunar Signals, that newsletter. So if you're interested in that, check out my Patreon. It's the same at SJ Anderson 144. I'll do some video updates through Patreon too. It's a cool platform that I feed. So anyhow, that's it. And just lovely to be here. Have a wonderful eclipse and enjoy whatever emerges for you, you know, and keep that self-talk positive. Keep, you know, thinking about astrology and the symbols. How can it be working with you and for you? I think a lot of this is the stories we tell ourselves about it. And we have a lot of power there to kind of infuse, you know, useful stories. And then if not spiritual bypassing, but then as life is tough, we can use astrology to help us process the tough stuff. But, you know, we just encourage you to stay hopeful and positive as much as you can. And, you know, October second half, we kind of come out of this heavy processing and we get into a little bit more of that Sagittarian energy. So maybe second half, enjoy. If this eclipse season has been quite challenging or impactful, you know, that'll shift out of here by full moon in Aries mid-month. So anyhow, I don't want to get too much into all this, but just good luck to everybody out there. Right.
No, I like that. That's what we do, right? That's what we do. And then we've got that new moon in Scorpio, beginning of November. Then we got and that's me being, you know, Gemini rising. I can just talk. So I'm just actually looking at the time. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a time to let's do this. But thank you again. Hopefully we'll have, I'll be able to have you on the channel again soon for a different topic. And yeah, I just really want to thank you for being here. And I hope everyone really enjoyed this and got what you needed out of it. And definitely get your birth chart readings. And I hope it's just, again, you know, brought a lot of insight for you on your rising sign and why I do recommend you reading your rising sign as well. But I'm going to just let you go. Everyone enjoy the weekend. Have an amazing weekend. Again, huge eclipse, big moment that's happening. And then, you know, we're coming out of eclipse season. But I hope everyone is excited for the changes that you're going to be making in your lives. So much big things happening in everybody's lives. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, SJ. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And we'll see you soon. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, SJ. Bye-bye.
Thank you, boy.